about yourself in that kind of context. Because sometimes we rip roaring and ready to go in the classroom, and we don't yet really understand, one, that if that is the case, what we need to bring to the table. Level of enthusiasm, interest, a level of passion, a level of, expertise that may be different at first period than it is at sixth period. And not just assuming because those kids are there because you get paid that they need to be listening.
Right.
So we'll do a little stuff about teaching and everything else, but we're going to start with today with my general thing for the big picture, which is context. So context for us today is an asset versus a deficit model. Okay? An asset versus a deficit model. And we're going to start by doing that by talking about African American history. You can figure out how this is all going together. So I want to start with, this will be a little interactive, so y'all going to get to raise hands and ask questions and whatever else. So we're going to start with the notion of, all right, the concept of asset versus deficit is that you start off with an understanding that sees whatever situation you're in by identifying the positives versus starting with the negative. And you guys all know, when you're in a school district that's program improvement, when you're in the school district where API scores are low, it starts usually with, look at these kids. They don't come to the classroom with this. Their parents didn't do this. They didn't get this in the grade before they came to me. They didn't. Y'all can remember? And I know, I do a lot of work around education, K through 12, and everything else. And sometimes it's just amazing to go into a conference and to hear for 4 days that litany of stuff, because it gives everybody an out on what you don't have to do. All right, I'm going to start with that. I sometimes see people. So just give you a little bit of background. So I work at universities, but I also work in kind of K through 12 education. Paulette, myself, and some friends are the kind of creators of the school called Hardy Brown College Prep, which is in the Carousel Mall of San Bernardino, which was a charter school, started 2 years ago. I also was a consultant for the reorganization of a school called Hillcrest Elementary, which is in the jungle in LA, and it was part of the state public school choice initiative. I also have 2 other schools that are on the board right now to be approved. We just got some interesting news last night. I'm a little pissed off about one of them. But I'm looking at the pot. I'm looking at the pot, right? In Inglewood, LA. So all to talk about API scores, program improvement, all the rest. Very familiar with all that. Read 180, all the rest of the things that you guys are talking about. But sometimes I see teachers, administrators go to a very low-performing schools because they got the ultimate out. They never have to be accountable.
Right.
Because, a school I work with a lot of Jordan High School in LA, right next to Jordan Downs projects and whatever else. Every teacher got an out. The school's got a 531 API. Every teacher, parent, principal, administrator has an out. Look at these kids. We're right next to the project. What do you expect? And so they can be there for 30 years and never have to be held accountable for what they do, because they always have the ultimate out. Look where I teach. Anytime when we're interviewing teachers for jobs and stuff, anytime somebody starts with that, I cross them off the board already. Because it's not what that parent did before they got there. It's not what's going to happen after. You are accountable and responsible for what happens in the 6 or 8 hours that you got that kid. And your level of expectation or whatever else is what level they will move toward. And you guys all know this. You have been in schools in your life where whatever else, and there's one teacher you go, man, that teacher's on it. Or a counselor or a principal comes in and changes the entire school culture. And even though it's an institution, there's a reality of one person. So we're going to start with an asset versus a deficit model. So in dealing with, now we're switching to African American studies, so we're going to be looking at these next 4 days, and you guys are going to be talking about history, culture, religion, all kinds of stuff going throughout the whole African American experience, all that stuff, because we are looking at an asset versus a deficit, both historically and contemporarily. What I mean by that is, so today we start with an understanding. We are all here around the Underground Railroad, which has as its beginning an assumption that somebody was enslaved. And the easiest thing is to start with the deficit model. Who are the slaves? Versus switching it up and even beginning to talk about semantics and language. So on this trip, we will not be talking about, we will try not to talk about slaves. Because slaves, the word, is a fait accompli. It's the end when you say it. It's a slave. And our assumptions come, there was probably something wrong with that person. Who is a slave? I'm opening up right now. So who's a slave? What is a slave? Who is a slave?
Anyone that's in bondage to a person or to a superior.
Okay, she says anyone who's in bondage to a person or superior or something like that. Somebody else. Who is a slave? Or what is a slave?
Someone that wasn't a citizen.
Someone that was not a citizen. Okay? So questions about citizenship will be important too, alright? So bondage, citizenship. Somebody else. Who is a slave? Kenny says someone controlled by someone else. Okay? Somebody else. Who's a slave?
Someone who wasn't even considered a person or a human.
Someone who was not considered a person. Okay? Keep going. Who is a slave? In the back. What's his name again, sister? I'm so sorry.
Rochelle.
Rochelle?
Me?
No, right in the back.
Jackie.
Jackie! Alright. Jackie!
Someone who serves someone else
Someone who serves someone else and
and there's no gain.
there's no gain. Somebody else right here.
Someone that's perceived to have defects.
Someone, listen to that.
Perceived to have defects.
Yeah, no, I'm saying someone who is perceived to have defects. Think about that. We started to this model. I always ask kids, where they'll ask me, so why were Africans enslaved? And it starts from there with the deficit model. They must have been dumber. They must have been somehow inferior. They must have been, if this were less civilized. They must have been something, right? They must have been, because we're trying to figure out how they got in the situation, right? And how, at least in the United States, 4 million come to this place, right? And we're talking about the big picture, maybe 100 million from the continent to the Americas. And when I say the Americas, that's Alaska to Argentina, California to the Caribbean, okay? Because they go all through and over, right? So you say to yourself, how does one group of people from Europe come to another space and place called America, dominate the people who live there to such a degree that most people can't sniff a sign of them nowhere unless you go to Pachanga or Pala or San Manuel or, am I right?
Yes.
And then bring a whole nother group from another continent over to this place to populate certain parts of it to where you don't even see white folks. Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, right? So the assumption comes that the person who came over and did the dominating got to be superior. I mean, you guys know, I know we want to get all brothers, sisters, black bride and all that, but the beginning assumption has to be they have something going for them that the Indians and Africans simply didn't have going for them. I'm just saying, if I told you the story, didn't put color, didn't put continent, and I just told you a story about a group of people who comes to one place, dominates and decimates the other group, and dominates another group of people and brings them all the way over to change the entire history of a geographic span in North, South America, to where it's changed forever. I would say that the person who initiates and controls that must be superior. I'm sorry, you know what I mean? And I would think, by nature, that the group that died off must be inferior, if not intellectually, genetically. Why they die when the other group didn't die, right? Militarily, why couldn't they figure out what the other dude was rolling with? They couldn't counter that. Well, the European had a gun, but there was 25 million Indians and 4 million Europeans. 400 Europeans in prison, right? So how does 400 dominate 25 million? They should have been offing them brothers the minute they got off the boat, right? I'm just, was the gun that superior? Damn, the gun just, one bullet, but I got 55 arrows. This shit. I'm just saying, the time it takes you to get that little gun together, I done popped you, right? So there's an assumption that I'm going to come with that the people who got dominated must have been inferior, at least genetically. And when I talk about disease and why the Indian dies off and the European doesn't, the natural assumption must be that God or the Creator didn't make the Indian with what He made the European with. understand that these are some of the assumptions that we carry with us, whether spoken or unspoken, and guarantee you that your students, as they go through this educational process, have been reinforced with, because the way in which their books are written only tell that kind of a story, right? So they've been here from first, second, third, right? From the beginning of Thanksgiving, right? Where everybody's supposed to come together and be all in joy and harmony, and then the next thing you know, it's the Declaration of Independence, and I don't see no brown brothers at the table. You know, I mean, you how you go from, hey, we all having dinner together, little canned cranberry sauce, and all, you know, and then all of a sudden, 100-something years later, we got a new nation, and the Indian ain't nowhere around. But there's no explanation of systematic genocide of the Indian, right? No explanation. No real, everyday, how do you go from 25 million to less than 500,000 today? No real explanation. So a kid must believe, and your parent must believe, and you probably believe, because we've all been educated in the same system. So we go to the other group, the group of Africans, the darker group. So assumptions start. Why did they get African? Somebody. How did this happen? How's the brother man? I'm gonna start with this. I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna go a little Nation of Islam, FOI, Black Panther, you know, Black Studies, all the rest of that little, you know. So we were kings and queens in Africa, and we were kings and queens in Africa, and we were kings and queens in Africa. Y'all get where I'm coming from? And we were kings and queens in Africa, and we were kings and queens in Africa, right? And you are a queen, my sister, and you are a king, my brother, right? You know, and because we even do rite the passage programs, right? And we just throw that at the young brother, right? You a king, my brother. Walk like a king. And the brother looking around going, if I'm a king, why am I living like a... You know, you telling me I'm a king and you ain't got your stuff together.
Right.
You telling me, I'm just... So if we start with you a king and queen, my brother, you created the pyramids and math and science, and Imhotep was your, right? How did you end up being in the project? Somebody help me. How would you? Yes. Yeah, speak up a little bit. Okay, so he said it's because of their skin color, okay? So do you mean it's because of their skin color that skin color meant weaker, inferior, or you mean skin color means what? Perceived. Okay, so let's take that at the beginning, because a lot of people start with this one, right? That blacks were enslaved because of their skin color, for a number of reasons people will talk about. So there's some that people will talk about these perceived biological differences, that people will say, well, the African could withstand heat better, right? Y'all heard this one, right? Bigger, stronger, faster, right? That's why you play football, basketball, baseball, can run track, can win gold medals, right? That's why at the 100 meters we're going to see all brothers from Allen, you know, crossing the tape, right? So the notion is that we were superior physically, and thus it made us more adaptable, and that the sun didn't affect us the way that it affected the European, right? That I can sit out in the sun and, you know. Now, I'm just, and I may make an assumption that's not true right now. All y'all look like black folks to me. Some of y'all feel a little heat right now? It's a little humid, right? And last time I checked, all y'all live in the Inland Empire, right? Yeah. And last time I checked, when we got on the bus, or the day before, when it was like 100,000 million plus degrees, right? And I guarantee you that all y'all turned on your air conditioner. You didn't go, because I'm black, I don't need no air conditioner. I don't need no air conditioner. You know, black folks, electricity bill should be lower then, right? No, I'm just, if we use this, what I'm saying, sometimes history, you got to use common sense too, right? So, if when it's 101 in Moreno Valley, are you walking down Alessandro, cool, like this, the other side of the pillar? I mean, just, you know, and white people just sweating. They just sweat, they can't live. And you are walking around like, this don't affect me because my skin color allows me to be more hot is hot. Humid is humid. Hot ass is hot ass. Okay.
Yes.
You know, if you come from a hot ass place to a hot ass place, right? the difference, you know, so that's not necessarily the other thing is about the bigger, stronger part. The average size of the African brought to the Americas was 5'6". The average of all groups that come to the Americas, the largest group, it's not the majority, but the largest group are a group of people we call the Bantu, who come from what is the Congo-Angola region, which is West Central Africa. 1/3 of all people who come to the Americas are from that group. They are traditionally a small people. They're not, we get this Mandingo, Watusi, we do this, right? Big brother walking in, it wasn't that. So that's not the case, all right? So it's not the biological issue. They can't deal with it better, and the group that's coming is not necessarily big, strong, faster, and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So, another reason, why the Africans? Because they could, but why couldn't? See, you guys get where I'm coming from? We start getting to some understanding. Because they could. Who's they?
The European.
The European. Because they could. Why? You get where I'm coming from? Because they could. What does that mean?
That they thought that we were inferior.
Just because somebody think I'm inferior, does that make me inferior?
No, but I guess our perception of them.
So maybe you think maybe the African thought that the European was superior, and so when the European come, he said, "Look, he got white skin. It's over. I'm giving up. This dude got me." I'm just saying, and you guys understand how we're gonna do this, right? I use the Socratic method. So you get where I'm coming from? So you come over on a boat and see me, and I look at you, and by nature I go, "You must got something I ain't got." So take 100 million of me over the next. Right here, Mickey, and then Richard. Yeah.
I think it's more of a mentality that they instilled in us. First of all, they caught us off guard.
Okay, wait. First you said it's a mentality that they instilled in us.
And we kind of pass that on, not really being aware of what we're doing, but the mentality that they pass on to generation to generation.
But we're going back to the continent, we're going back to 500 years ago. So, when we say there's a...
Instill fear in us.
But what I'm saying is, going back, let's go 600 years ago, okay? So, what is the inherent fear that the African, not the African American who's been enslaved over 400 years, but the African who is living in his space, controlling his own or her own destiny, creating civilizations and societies, creating technology and philosophical concepts. You see what I'm saying? You guys get back. I'm going back to why the African. Does he or she or they inherently have these inferior? No, they shouldn't. Right? Because now I can understand 500 years later. That's a whole other thing.
Right.
But let's get back a little bit, Jackie.
Regionally, perhaps the resources that one people had versus what the other people had made them seem more dominant and superior. It wasn't because, like you said, we were kings and queens in one place. So how do you treat those kings and queens and make them slaves to another people? So maybe it was a regional difference that allowed the superiority to happen.
Very good, real quick. So there's a question about technological difference, and what I mean by that is the notion that maybe somebody is technologically more superior than the other one, right? That somehow they got stuff that's more advanced. It's kind of like when the U.S. tries to go and fight certain countries, right? And it's like the U.S. got bombs, they got whatever else, and other groups don't got that, right? And so you go, well, and I forget, I'll post the exact book, I don't know where, I got it in my book, but the differences between Europeans and Africans technologically was virtually even all the way up until the 1800s. Virtually even. And I'll get the quote of the exact book, but virtually even. There's this notion that we talk about of the superiority of the gun, right? That we think about, right? Now, and I'm going back to a comment I made about arrows right here. So, anybody ever seen the movie Glory? And if you see Glory, you know there's these battle scenes, right? Where the colored troops get ready to go against the other troops. And you guys notice how they're shooting their gun. They shoot the gun, and then they pull the gun back up. They pour gunpowder into the gun. They put a little bullet in there. They have to take this little thing, tap it down, pick it back up. Some of them have to light this thing and then shoot the other person.
How you be dead by the
That's the 1860s. The European, the musket, and the thing that we think about was not, and it shot a big fat ball that didn't necessarily kill you just because it hit you. It might knock you crazy, but it didn't necessarily, and it didn't have all the thrust that we think about it having. You know, it didn't do all the stuff. It wasn't. It was. Now I gotta load this thing back up, and once again, while I'm loading it up, somebody else with a bow and arrow and a spear and a club and a rock and me up, right? Just bam, right? So it wasn't a technologically superior complex. The only thing that one could talk about having differently was the issue of having a gun or a firearm, but it was not used in war yet in the way that we think about it today. As a matter of fact, if you look at glory, and once again, that's a depiction of 1860s, what they really use the gun for, and this is why guns are shaped the way they are, is that the bayonet, the knife on the front of it, and the butt of it, which becomes a club. So you shoot the gun for the first few seconds, and then you begin to slice people with the knife and hit them with the club. That's why guns are still created today. It's all because the concept is that the gun only had a limited amount of utility. And then, after you shot it once or twice, you went back to the way people have been fighting for 8,000 years, which was a club and a spear or a sword. So, the European couldn't roll up on, you know, the Yoruba, who's a group in Nigeria or whatever else, in 1820 and bring 400 people on a ship and dominate them. It just didn't happen. It just, you guys know Africa was not colonized by Europeans, meaning taken over. So the notion is that they're superior until the 1880s. And they only maintained their dominance from the 1880s to the 1950s. So from 1880 to give or take 1954, 55, when we see Ghana, Kenya, all these other nations get their independence, this is where we get Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, this is where we get Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, where we get all these freedom fighters, right? So it's only a 70-year period that Europe actually dominates the continent. And that's a relatively new experience in the history of the world. So history does not bear out the technological superiority of the Europeans at any point. And the notion of when Europe finally colonizes Africa, which is beginning in the 1880s, and you guys have all heard the story, you've seen the movies of like Shaka Zulu, right? So Zulu was a dude who's down there kicking it with a major group of technologically savvy Africans called the Zulu in South Africa. And when the British come up and roll up on him, and they're supposed to be the most dominant military power in the world at the time. Remember, this is when they say the sun never sets on the British Empire. This is when they've already dominated India. They just gave back Hong Kong 12 years ago. You know what I'm saying? This is when England, is the man. And yet they roll up on this brother, and it takes them 13 years to be able to finally dominate him. And the reason it becomes part of lore, the fact that an American news station or American TV station would make a 5-day miniseries about a brother, was because their mindset, they thought, I gotta be superior to these Africans, right? I must be. Gotta be. And the British roll up on Zulu, and Homeboy's like, sorry. And because he's giving them as good as he's getting, the people who don't like Europeans and who don't like the British in Europe, the French, the Germans, are writing newspaper articles, stories, sending reporters down, talking to the brothers. Because they hate England because they're their rivals, you know what I'm saying? And England is getting it handed to them left and right. So they're developing the lore around Shaka Zulu because he's doing something that they can't hang with. And so that's why we have enough material to do a 5-day miniseries on this individual, because everybody's going down there, checking him out, checking out his war tactics, checking out everything else. Real quick, another brother. You guys know Toussaint L'Ouverture. So Toussaint L'Ouverture is a brother who lived in what's now today Haiti, and it was a French colony called Saint-Domingue. It was the largest sugar-producing colony in the Americas. Even though it was small, it produced more sugar than Brazil actually did. It was considered the jewel of the Antilles, the place where everybody wanted to own or whatever else. But it had an interesting reality. It was about 8-1 Africans to Europeans. And I assume part of the context had been for those who live there, man, these people have always controlled me. They've always been in control. You know, I know there's one of them for every hate of me, but one day, these brothers decided that wasn't going to be the case. And they started a war, it's called the Haitian Revolution, where they beat down the French and beat them down and get their freedom. They're the first and only fully successful slave revolt in the Americas. It's led by this dude, Toussaint Louverture, who was a slave, a house slave, who simply, when the Europeans had actually started fighting each other, he then says, this is our opportunity, and organizes the Africans to go and take them down. So, because this was the jewel of the Antilles, the most prosperous sugar colony in the Americas, when the French lose it, the British roll up. These are just a bunch of Africans. They ain't got what we got. We're the strongest navy in the world. This is an island, meaning it's surrounded by water. We're going to come and dominate them. Toussaint and the Africans beat down the British. So then, cousins around the corner, the Spanish. They got Cuba, Puerto Rico, right? They roll up on Toussaint. They beat them down. And then, the most dominant military power of that age, Napoleon Bonaparte, takes over France and decides, I'm rolling back to get my stuff. Napoleon rolls up against Toussaint, and they beat down Napoleon. Matter of fact, it was their defeat of Napoleon in 1802 that precipitated France selling the Louisiana Purchase to the United States of America. Because it's designed for, we're going to take back our sugar colony, which is going to be the money, and then we're going to go and reinvest in Louisiana, Arkansas, you know what I'm saying, and create this new. But because they get beat down so bad, Napoleon then cuts his losses and sells the Louisiana territory to the United States of America. Napoleon is so messed up around Toussaint that he can't beat him militarily. So he proposes a truce between the two groups where they're going to try to develop new diplomatic relations. And they send a ship to Haiti to talk to, to meet with, and they kidnap Toussaint and bring him back to France, and then he dies in a French jail. And they couldn't beat him on the technological aspect, you see what I'm saying? And the brothers was fighting with machetes, and the European had the ship and all the rest of it. What I'm trying to show you, you get where I'm coming from? And this is all give or take. Shaka is 1880 something, Toussaint is 1796. So, as I told you before, even at this time period, they are not superior technologically. So we get back to the question. So why the Africans? So if it's not physical, it's not technological. Mickey and then Frank.
I think that's what you said. Their mentality was different. They actually believed in not fighting against person's word was their word. So when we said negotiate, we took him at his word, but that's what he was doing.
So are you saying that all Africans had this, I take people at their word?
No. But I think they had a different spiritual concept of looking at people and being more open and loving. We're still there.
I understand what you're saying, and here, and I'm sorry, I don't know. Part of what I'm going to be doing is blam, you know what I mean? And then you get mad at me, and I want you to engage me at lunch. I want you to talk to me. I want you to do all the rest of the stuff, right? So we have these assumptions about the beautiful altruistic nature of the African, right? That he loves people differently, that his spirit is different, that he sees things in a different way. Now, African Americans might be that way because of their history. Afro-Brazilians because of their history of having to deal with domination. Afro-Cubans might be that way. But Toussaint understood the nature of the person he was fighting because he had fought so different of their powers, right? He just had moved to a point of, here we go as a nation, and we're going to do this thing. You know what I mean? It wasn't that he just trusted Napoleon. He just, we're going to do this thing. It's just like if Obama went to whatever country because, we just going to set it in, and the other person just pulled some trickery on him, right? So it wasn't, this dude had killed many Europeans. He had killed his master, who his master thought, when the whole slave revolt first broke out, it was the field Negroes at first, right? And so the master thought that Toussaint was a house slave. And it's, I know that we start off with, Malcolm X and the Battle of the Bullet and the house slave versus the field slave, and the field slave is supposed to be the radical dude, and the house slave is supposed to be the sellout, right? Well, the history doesn't tell us that, actually. I think the house slave understands the oppression a little bit differently because he sits and lives with it every day. And when we look at history about who leads a lot of these revolts, it's the one who is actually more privileged who leads the revolt because he understands the difference between what he's getting and what other people aren't getting. You know what I'm saying? So the revolt breaks out, and the white people are assuming it's the Africans because there was a whole bunch of new Africans there. A lot of them from the Congo, a lot of them from Nigeria. And they just assume that's them brothers, but I got Toussaint, he's my house slave, he's good. And Toussaint Toussaint's master was one of the military leaders who was supposed to be propagating the war to keep the Africans down. Every day Toussaint came in and served this dude. You know, here's your tea, here's your whatever else. And the dude would have meetings with all the other military commanders of the island about what they gonna do, assuming the Negro wasn't gonna do nothing. And just, you know, cause he come on in, Toussaint, give me my tea, serve me my wine, take care of my stuff. And Toussaint sat in the cut for 3 months. And I assume he was walking down the street, the other brothers going, look at you, just sellouts, you just oil, you all with your master, and we trying to fight the war, and Toussaint sitting up there buying his time, checking out the maps of the island, checking out what the resources are of the European, checking out whatever else. All of a sudden, Toussaint disappeared. And it's this great book called The Black Jacobins. That's the best book about the Haitian Revolution. All of a sudden, the master's like, Toussaint's gone, and the master is miffed. He's just like, he must have got sick. You know when your pet gets sick and he go off to the wilderness to die just because because he's just like, I don't want. I mean, literally, this is going back to the superiority. This Negro couldn't. And all of a sudden, Toussaint shows up on a white horse at the door with a sword, saying it's time. If you guys get what I'm going, it's time for you to meet your maker. It's time for, and he becomes the guy who strategizes, who unites all the rest of the Africans, and who's able to get them to fight against the other groups. So he totally understood who his master was. And when I say his master, not just his physical master, but who his master, who the system that was dominating him was. Okay? And remember, you guys, nobody ever stays on top forever, right? I mean, and we this country called the United States of America, who's worried right now because we don't know how little countries like Iraq and Afghanistan can give us a go, right? You guys get where I'm coming from? You guys we are all children of our parents were Vietnam War people, all the rest of that kind of stuff. What did the United States think? This little group of rice farmers down the middle of Southeast Asia can't do nothing against us with all of our stuff. But the little rice farmer took his knife and formed it into, right? And did all kinds of stuff because he was protecting his own space. What I'm saying is, don't think that you can't assume that same spirit of the African. You know, the African wanted to protect his space too. He wanted to live a self-determinate life, one to where he was in control of his destiny, right? He didn't quickly give in to these things. So I'll give you the answer because you guys are like, what? Yeah.
I don't know. I've heard this somewhere, and I don't know where, and I don't know how true it is, but like there were words that Europeans going over at one point, maybe in the beginning, in purchasing African Americans.
Oh, you're right on it. Yes, go ahead.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Africa had a sort of indentured servant, and at the time, you could work as an indentured servant and come back to be a free person. Well, they're negotiating with Europe at the time with the understanding of these people are going over as indentured servants, and then they will be coming back.
Right.
So it was a conversation, it was a negotiation, but then we were tricked to the point where we didn't come back. We didn't know that, we were being taken across the ocean and not brought back.
Real quick, I'm just trying because everybody couldn't hear what you were saying. What she was saying was, and what Audrey also was started with, was this notion of that Africans, in essence, that there was a system of slavery in Africa that was different than the European system of slavery, where people had indentured servants, other things like that. And the African initially began by trading with Europeans in terms of trading servants, and the African thus then was tricked into a thing that was very different than what they thought they had in Africa. Okay? Yes.
I think that at some point they saw how good they were for labor and all that stuff, and so then they were like, oh, well, let's just go. I mean, I guess at some point it just began, well, we're just going to go and take them. That's how they got to the point of being able to.
And then Audrey adds in that maybe they begin to see how good these people were for labor, for other things like that, that then they said, let's go ahead and take them. What I'm trying to get to, and what we're going to try to, what I'm trying to shake for all you guys is, we all come to this thing with assumptions about European superiority that we don't know that we actually have until we start verbalizing. I'm telling you this as a person with a PhD in Latin American and African American history, a person who believes he done been conscious, you know what I mean? A person who is all up in here, okay? So when we get to this last stream of responses, it begins to be the beginning of the question. Why Africans? Well, first off, Africans are no different than anybody else. No smarter, no taller, no shorter, no whatever else. Africa is a varied continent. As my man right here is from East Africa will tell you, every everybody doesn't come in one shade that looks like me, who may be from Nigeria. You see what I'm saying? That North and South Africa, the Sahara, all the rest of these things geographically define different ways in which people interact not only with themselves but with the environment. You know, so that they develop certain skills and traits based on where they live, and also that it's something like 3 North Americas would fit into one Africa in terms of size. And I say this because when people create maps, they don't create them to scale. Maps are created to make everything even. If you ever look at a map, every map that you get, that you use in your class or whatever else, at the center of the map is the Atlantic Ocean. On the left is North and South America, and on the right is Europe, Africa, and Asia. But if the world is round and it rotates and revolves, no place is ever in the center. You guys remember? If it's round and it rotates and it revolves around the thing, I'm choosing to take a snapshot of the globe when it puts certain things at the center. You guys remember? So even the creation of the map is political, because then it makes sense for me to say the Western Hemisphere, right? Because now if I put the Pacific Ocean in the middle, the West is Europe. You guys hear where I come from? Or if I flip it like that, everything is a little bit different. All right? So maps are created by victors, meaning victorious persons, to replicate or to reinforce their sense of superiority. So North America, when you look at a map, looks exactly the same size as Africa almost. It looks all proportional, but it's not. Because just visually, if I looked at the map and saw Africa 3 times as big as America or North America, once again, if we're just talking about the kid who walks in and thinks, he might go, dang, that's bigger. And for me, bigger means better. Right? Think about what right now we were talking about time, right? We're on, what time is it? So time is all measured from a place in England. Greenwich, England is the international time zone. So you go 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. From that to the west is us in California, and then the other way. So who defines it? Did God say that's where time was going to start? How God just look up and say time starts in England? But we accept it as reality. Why? Because England dominated so many people. England had Asia, England had North America, England had South America, England had Africa. And so they said time will be based on what time it is in England, because that's the only time that matters. You 3 hours away from us, so you need to start this because we started at 6. So I guess you need to start at 3. Because we're the ones who are dominating you. Okay? So I'm throwing that out there. So Africa is 3 times as big geographically as North America. It is not over there. It rotates and revolves. It has no primacy over anything or whatever else. Africans, like everybody else, slavery begins at the beginning of time. Slavery is not an African institution. Slavery is a human institution. From the beginnings of time, one group oppresses another group. Somebody gets an advantage over somebody else. I don't care if it's the Maya in South America. I don't care if it's the Egyptian over the Nubian. I don't care if it's you guys hear where I'm from? The Englishman who's white over the Irishman who's white. That's human nature. That's something we do. We begin to dominate other people if we have the opportunity. We just do. All right? So there was slavery in Greece, slavery in Rome, slavery in Africa, slavery in the Aztec Empire, slavery everywhere, right? So slavery is nothing new, different, or special to the African and the European relationship than it was any other place, okay? At times, slavery had different characteristics. So in Rome, someone could be a slave. I forget which one it was. One of the great philosophers is technically a slave, but the people valued their intellect and their humanity. And so that person could rise up, could be educated, could be a member of their household. It was just a legal definition and not a statement about your humanity. There's a very big difference, right? You know, some of us at some job, we feel we're enslaved, right? We still call it the slave, the plantation, right? But there's a relative level of that, right? Somebody else is going, that ain't as bad as you're saying it is, okay? So slavery is everywhere. So Africans developed institutions of slavery just like other people did, okay? In general, Africans had 2 types of slavery. There is one which is the more humane version that we talk about, that there is an African who dominates another group of people, and then in incorporate them. But then there was another which was just a straight war captain. We got war with each other. We didn't, it wasn't a debt issue, because a lot of times people were slaves because of debt. And so you were still a member of that society, then you were, but you would owe a debt, so now you owe. And because you owe, you are my slave, but it didn't take away that I believe you're still a person, a human, all the rest of these things. Your legal status puts you in that condition. But there are other people who are what we call captives of war. I fought with you. I got no love for you. I just was killing other people who looked just like you on the battlefield. There, I didn't, you guys remember, I didn't like Africans fought like this. And they outdid each other on love, you know what I mean? I love you more, I win, you know? My love quotient is higher. They fought people just like everybody else, okay? So, if we get up until, give or take, 1400s, there's this dude in Europe named Prince Henry the Navigator, we call him. He's from Portugal. And he began to define a program for European exploration of Africa. Now remember, as some parts of Africa, Morocco and others, are only 10 or 11 miles away from Europe. So Morocco at its tip is only 10 miles away from the southern tip of Spain. So some Africans have been having relationships with Europeans for hundreds of years. So the most important group we talk about are the Moors. So it's a group of Muslims from North Africa, from Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco, who in 711, we'll throw that out there. So in 711, under this guy named Tariq ibn Zayed, invade what is now Portugal and Spain and control it from 711 to 1492. So a group of Africans. I say this because we never think that African controls the Europeans. Our assumptions always go the other way. From 711 to 1492, a group of North